Do you want to be fast, blasting off the starting block, every ounce of your power unleashed into a heart-pounding, all-out sprint? That's the 50-meter race. It's simple. You go as hard as you can from the first stroke to the last. No pacing and no holding back. And whether it takes you 20 seconds or 40, the mission is the same. Unleash maximum speed. And in this video, I'll break down the key scientific principles behind sprint training, including energy systems, muscle adaptations, and technique. And at the end, give you a blueprint of a weekly program with 4 different training strategies you can use as a starting point for your own practice design. So let's dive into speed. After a 2-decade wait and a collective prayers from all the sprinters around the world, the 50-meter sprint distances in fly, back and breaststroke are finally making their Olympic debut in 2028, giving the earned legitimacy and respect for the true high-powered racehorses of the pool, after years of being neglected by many. And what could be more entertaining than watching these fast-twitch power machines battle it out for the hundreds of seconds which often decide the races? I am obviously very biased, as I was and still am a natural-born sprinter. I reached the highest level of success on the world stage in the 50-meter distance, and here's the part that still haunts me at nights. I did it without ever truly training for it. And not a day goes by without me wondering what I could have become if I'd been free to chase my speed, my real gift. Instead, I poured literally tens of thousands of hours into endurance training, trying to mold myself into something I wasn't. And all that training and my endurance barely budged. I was forced to run and swim against my own nature. And now, years later, I can't help but wonder, what if I trained the way I was built to swim? But you can learn from my mistakes. If you want to go all in on becoming a 50 specialist, whatever the stroke, or even just build a foundation of true sprint speed, this video will change the way you train. And if you want to dive even deeper into the principles I'll cover today, I put together a free ebook that breaks it all down with examples and explanations you can apply right away, and much more. Check the link in the comments. Now, back to the video. Some of what we'll cover today might apply across events, and you can, of course, still incorporate training for longer distances to your program with intelligent training design. But know that the 50s are very different from other events. And while all swimmers should pay attention to their speed development, pure 50 specialists are different because they don't really have to pay any attention to what everybody else is doing, because the 50s are a totally different beast than any other event in swimming, and here is why. Firstly, we have to understand the basics of how we derive energy in different races. While all the energy systems, the phosphagen or immediate energy system, the anaerobic or glycolytic system providing short-term energy, and the aerobic or oxidative system, which cover us for a long time, are always on whenever you move forward in the pool, or even at full rest for that matter. Their contributions shift dramatically when the length of the race changes. So what fuels different races? It's the aerobic contribution that largely differentiates races from each other. Everything over 200 meters starts to be a race determined by the development of your aerobic system. But the 50, and to a lesser degree the 100, is energized mostly by the energy provided both the phosphagen and glycolytic systems. Since the aerobic system doesn't have enough time to catch on due to the short length of the race, a high level of aerobic capacity isn't needed for success in these absolute sprint events. And you can think of it like a car. For a long road trip, you need a big gas tank representing the aerobic system to keep going, but for a drag race, you need a turbocharged engine that explodes off the starting line, your phosphagen and anaerobic system. And training for the 50s is about maximizing that turbo boost and not expanding the gas tank. And it obviously doesn't hurt you to be aerobically fit, but you have to weigh in the compromises and especially opportunity costs between building a better aerobic engine or developing your sprinting. And in the case of the 50s, it is very hard to justify any extra aerobic development beyond what comes through the sprint training itself, as any time spent developing aerobic fitness is time not spent maximizing your anaerobic power and speed. On the other hand, this aerobic dominance of most of the events is also one of the reasons why a middle distance swimmer is usually able to excel in multiple event distances. While the neural demands are different between, say, an 800 and a 200 race, the majority of fitness work to improve the function of the aerobic system is largely similar across the distances, but not for the 50. It is fundamentally different. If you want to maximize the function of your non-oxygen dependent energy system, you must specifically target them, as the adaptations differ greatly from aerobic ones. And this is where traditional swim training fails 50-meter sprinters. You see, the major adaptations of most training types we traditionally do in swimming are really for increasing the capacity and efficiency of your aerobic machinery. And despite what conventional wisdom might say, interval training is almost always aerobic training. And that can be a discussion for another day. But anyway, these aerobic training-induced adaptations include increasing the number of your mitochondria in your cell to burn energy more cleanly, boosting your capillary density to better deliver oxygen to the muscles, and enhancing various aerobic enzymes to make your muscles use oxygen more efficiently. And this all sounds good, but there's a twist. All these adaptations in general aim to lessen the effects of acidity and thus reduce lactate production and accumulation, allowing you to swim faster for longer. And of course, this is great for a 200 and awesome for 400, but antithetical for what's required in the 50-meter sprint. For the 50-meter sprint, your goal isn't reducing lactate production, the sign of increased acidity or hydrogen ions accumulating in your muscles, but actually to maximize both the absolute quantity of lactate and the speed at which it's produced. This metric, known as the maximum lactate production rate, or VLA max for short, represents your anaerobic capacity. As getting the lactate high very fast is a sign of a robust, well-developed anaerobic engine. And in simple terms, from an energy system perspective, your goal is to get your muscles flooding with lactate as fast as possible, because that rapid lactate production equals the ability to produce raw explosive power, which obviously is diametrical opposite adaptation you want for longer races. And this is the big dilemma most swimmers face. While it is possible to develop both the aerobic qualities concurrently with the anaerobic ones, which would be appropriate in training for the 100 and 200 and even 400 meter race distances, you have to realize that it will always be a compromise, as these different adaptations actively compete with each other. For one capacity to increase, the other one has to give room for it to grow, and vice versa. For example, in the molecular level, we know that aerobic training stimulates pathways like AMPK and BGC1 alpha, which drive muscles towards oxidative metabolism, increasing mitochondrial density in the cells and promoting muscle fiber conversion towards the slower types. And they do this partly by suppressing glycolytic enzymes responsible for rapid energy production needed in fast sprints. And on the flip side of the coin, anaerobic training activates pathways such as mTOR, which in turn promotes strength and power development and glycolytic capacity. All about energy generation without oxygen. And this happens partly by suppressing aerobic enzymes and by promoting muscle fiber conversion towards the faster types. And these molecular switches cannot be on simultaneously. When AMPK is switched on during and after endurance training, mTOR is suppressed, and vice versa again. Therefore, Emphasizing one system inherently diminishes the potential development of the other due to this opposing signaling within muscle cells. So unfortunately, you can't have it all. And in a sense, per 50-meter sprinters and in the other side of the spectrum, the open water swimmers have it easy. They don't have to balance this tug of war between endurance and speed / power and make educated guesses and compromises throughout their training. They know exactly in which direction to take their training, while everybody else, like those pesky 100, 200 and 400 swimmers, they kind of have to take part in this balancing act. But energy systems aren't the whole story. It's also about your muscles, the tools doing the actual work that determine whether that energy turns into power and speed. As there is not only a difference in energy production between different swimming events, but we also have to consider the role played by the muscles, the very engines that are consuming that energy. And you probably know that your muscles are composed of different fiber types, broadly classified into fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. Although in reality, we should see their contraction velocity capabilities as kind of a continuum. While the ratio of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers an individual has is a highly inherited trait, training can partially modify the characteristics of these fibers. Specifically, endurance exercise of all kind do transition the fastest, most explosive fast twitch muscle fibers, or type 2B fibers as they're called, toward a slightly slower but more fatigue resistant type 2A fibers. And this is a good thing for most swimming events. You maintain most of the good characteristics of fast contraction velocity and force output, but add some myoglobin, capillaries and mitochondria into the mix to better utilize oxygen and help with metabolic waste removal. And thus you can now sustain high rates of power for a longer time period. But notice when I say you maintain most of the good characteristics, because you do inevitably lose some degree of the contraction speed and maximal power output as your fastest fibers shift towards endurance performance. And while this is a positive for a 200 swimmer, any loss of this inherited speed for a 50 sprinter is a catastrophe. And again, the same theme repeats. Endurance training to enhance the aerobic system is mostly positive even for a 100 race and definitely for events longer than 100. But for a 50, the adaptations are at best irrelevant and at worst actively detrimental for the pure sprinter's speed. Now, before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room. And I already know what some of you might be thinking, because I can hear the usual doubts and counter-arguments to all we have discussed. The most frequent and, might I say, fair question is the fact that most elites at the top of the podiums in the Olympics have, at least in some point of their career, used very high volumes of training. And I know, Alexander Popov reportedly did huge volumes in training and broke the 53 record. And Caleb Dressel was coached by Greg Troy, a notorious high-volume advocate. But you are not Alex Popov and you are not Caleb Dressel. And if you are, I would say hello, but I'm not worthy to open my mouth in front of such swimming gods. But really, we don't A, know how they actually trained, and B, know what was their ultimate potential if they had used, and I can't believe I'm saying this, smarter training. In any regard, here's something people often forget. Swimming isn't just about the fitness. Most of the success is determined by the skills or swimming technique you possess. And both of these example swimmers had a competitive advantage in that department against their competitors. Dressel dominated the start and underwaters, and the swimming tsar ruled the surface swimming. Their edge wasn't in the mileage they did, it was the mastery of swimming skills. However, even in the world of skills and technique, The 50s demand a totally different approach, because what works for a 200 won't cut it in a 50, and trying to apply the same technical mindset across all events is one of the biggest mistakes swimmers and coaches make. You see, swimming is always a technique-determined sport, and while all this physiology talk might be interesting for some, at the end of the day, the differentiating factor between swimmers is especially their distance per cycle, and to a lesser degree their ability to hold that length at higher and higher tempos or frequencies. But here's the thing, in every other race, swimmers must strike a delicate balance between generating as much propulsion as possible while also managing efficiency to sustain it over time. And in the 50, we don't have to make any compromises. Instead of training our strokes to be efficient to conserve energy, in the full sprint we only have to think how to maximize the propulsion and minimize the drag, without any consideration for how we can keep it up for long, because we simply don't have to do that. You're not conserving energy, you're unleashing it. Your entire technical model should be about maximum propulsion, minimum drag, and no concern for sustainability. And most swimmers kinda intuit their way through this. Just how our gait in running self-organizes from walking to jogging to running as we increase velocity. Similar phenomena happens in swimming, but not to the same extent, as swimming is not a natural ambulation moving forward method for Homo sapiens or humans. While it is true that, for example, the index of coordination in freestyle, the degree of overlap between arm strokes naturally becomes more continuous as you increase speed, because the faster you try to swim, the less time you have to spend gliding passively, and the more overlap there will be between strokes to sustain forward propulsion continuously. However, months or even years of endurance-based swimming training, which automatically emphasizes stroke economy and reduced energy expenditure, can profoundly influence and even constrain this natural emergence of more continuous power production when we start to speed up. So if the majority of your training is spent galloping a semi-catch-up stroke with noticeable pauses in front, that same stroking pattern becomes deeply ingrained in your brain and will be present when you sprint maximally as well. And even at the highest levels of sprinting, you'll still see non-symmetrical strokes with clear gaps in propulsion production, despite it being clear that continuous propulsion achieved through a more overlapping stroke pattern or positive index of coordination would produce better results. These swimmers have just spent years and years swimming slowly to enhance their stroking economy and can't help themselves even when it's go time. And that's the problem. They're trying to go fast with a stroke designed to go slow. And this lengthy explanation could be quite easily summed up by my own experience in swimming. In the 90s and 2000s, when I learned my breaststroke, it was all about the distance per cycle. We would brag to other swimmers on how fast we could go with minimal strokes. And when you combine this overall emphasis of the passive glide with the typical high-volume practices of those days, yes, I became very efficient at swimming relatively fast with low stroke numbers per pool length. But then came AMPK, who was revving the engine at plus 60 cycles per minute and just demolishing the competition with raw power and a stroke that defied everything we were taught about breaststroke. There was no way me, or anyone else for that matter, could compete with our measly tempo of 45 cycles per minute against a guy whose frequency was about a third higher with almost the same distance per stroke. And here's the thing. In hindsight, this change that was to come was obvious, because of course, gliding in space without actively pushing against the water will not maintain your peak velocity, and after a period of deceleration during the glide, you must then again accelerate, wasting energy to fight against inertia. And now, after my sad story, think about your own practice. What is your training actually teaching your body to do? Consider how much of your time is swam using the race technique specific to the 50. Probably minimal, as it is almost impossible to reproduce the movement pattern slowly. And in reality, Most of training is actively teaching you how not to maximize your absolute propulsion. And it's quite obvious when you are swimming slowly, as in a kind of an aerobic set, to keep the pace and heartbeat low. You let the strokes glide and wait for those signals of the recovery motions to find the most economic way to swim. But the same can be said even when you are repeatedly sprinting. Traditional intervals, even when done with quote-unquote full effort, encourage your brain to learn how to produce the same level of performance again and again, and not to produce one super maximal 100% effort. Think about it. If you do a set of 850s with 2-minute rest interval and aim to hold a similar level of performance repeat after repeat, how do your brain processes that goal, whether consciously or subconsciously? Well, first, your pace on the first or second repetition will not be maximal as you are gently getting used to the demand of the set. Afterwards, your effort might be maximal, but your velocity will not be even close to what you could do for one maximal repetition. During such a set, you are finding a stroking pattern that allows maximal velocity, but some level of economy at the same time to survive the set. And this is a different demand than full-on 50-meter style sprinting. The main skill adaptation when you repeat this kind of set is to make whatever speed you are aiming to hold more economical. Your nervous system, your muscles, and your energy production adapt to just that, not to sprint maximally for one repetition. And this is all good stuff, even again for 100, but it is actively pushing you away from the skill adaptations needed for pure sprinting. And all of this brings us to the original question again. What is your training actually teaching your body to do? Because if your daily practice is filled with gliding, pacing, and repetition-focused intervals, there's a good chance it's training you to survive effort and not to unleash it. And that's the reality for most swimmers, because they've never been shown how to train differently. So let's fix that. Let's build a sprint-focused plan, one that respects the physiology, the skill demands, and the neural patterns required to make you fast. And not just kind of fast, not fast by normal swimming standards, but explosively, undeniably fast. So what are the principles of creating a training environment that is conducive for speed development, both from the physiological and skills perspective? The first rule almost nobody wants to accept is to remove and actively avoid fatigue. Because once your brain perceives fatigue, it instinctively responds by reducing effort and enhancing stroke economy. Exactly the opposite of the adaptations required for maximal sprinting. And yes, this is very hard to accept, because while training for other distances, it is the fatigue you experience that signals you are getting the stimulus for improvement. But it's the opposite for speed. Unless you are giving an absolute 100% effort, or better yet, 101%, you're training something other than your maximum sprint speed. And this goes against decades of swimming training wisdom. But speed just doesn't come from a place of fatigue. It comes from precision applied under fully recovered conditions. Then, second rule is to simply remove competing training signals. And you can, of course, do some easy relaxed swimming and even train some slower speeds, but with the acknowledgement that it probably does not help your 50 performance directly, but it might indirectly improve your ability to recover and increase the elusive feel for the water. However, you should keep it minimal. Even that feel for the water argument, it's at least doubtful, because that feel is probably specific to your velocity. The feel of the water pressure in your limbs is very different when you are leisurely swimming than when attacking the water at full speed. So to continue in similar vein, the third rule is to find ways to train skills with your sprinting coordination. Because doing slow drills without the pressure to continuously hold the water with your pull and kicks, which is probably okay during the initial skill acquisition, in the long term probably directs your index of coordination and swimming rhythm in general in the wrong direction. So try to develop ways of moving in the water that encourage you to hold on to your continuous rhythm, or that allow you to consciously suggest yourself to constantly apply pressure to the water. So for example, this is where tools like parachute shine. They force your stroke to stay on when fatigue tries to pull you into glide mode. Now, a simple exercise like one-arm pulling for freestyle and backstroke, or let's say just breaststroke kicking, becomes inherently more transferable to your sprinting. And fourth, there is the obvious rule of that if you're not getting faster, you're getting slower. So, prioritize your speed training. And ultimately, all of the discussion we have had prior boils down to the most important factor. You must explicitly and consistently train speed. While speed is an integral part of training for every other distance as well, it becomes a whole other thing when it's the center of your training. Unless you are getting faster in your sprints week after week after week and month after month, then what the hell are you doing? In an eloquent way, it is so simple, but at the same time, cutthroat real. While training for the 200, you can let your absolute performance level go down a bit. While you are emphasizing, let's say, heavy endurance training, you know that eventually all the work will, at least hopefully, lead to better performance levels. But not with speed. Your improvement is always transparent. You know exactly whether you are improving or not, and cannot afford to train in a way that suppresses your speed capacity for more than few days. Otherwise, you run the risk of cascading effects that hamper your performance. Speed must be the center of your training, not a warm-up, not a throw-in set, and not a reward at the end. The center. And finally, the last principle, which is the hardest for the grinders to accept. Stop training when the desired pace or quality can no longer be sustained. To maximize sprint speed, it's critical to stop training once you can no longer maintain the desired pace or quality of movement. Continuing to push through fatigue risks reinforcing suboptimal movement patterns and diminishing the neural adaptations needed for explosive performance. By halting training at the point where quality declines, you preserve the integrity of your speed, like specific neuromuscular pathways, ensuring that every repetition reinforces that explosive, high-velocity patterns essential for peak sprint performance. This disciplined approach prevents the accumulation of fatigue-driven habits that could undermine your ability to consistently hit 100% or maybe even 101% effort, keeping your training laser focused on speed development, because it's always about quality over quantity. But after all this talk about what not to do, let's answer the real question. How do you actually get faster? What are the training ingredients of bringing your speed to new levels throughout the season? And let's start with the most important training strategy: pure speed development. And buckle up, because the answer is so simple that it's going to blow your mind. The only way to progressively overload your speed and thus get better is by swimming faster. That's it. It's not about more reps. It's not about longer sets. Just go faster. While all other physiological qualities do respond positively to doing more, which just means adding volume, speed just does not. And if we take this to the extreme, swimming one 15 to 25 meter sprint faster than you did last time, you already, by definition, overloaded your speed and had a successful session. Of course, doing that 3, 5, or even 7 times in a session is great, but the overload always comes from the speed, the velocity, and not the volume. So, please limit the volume and keep the repetitions short. Usually, even for the faster swimmers, there is no need to go over 25 meters. And if it takes you more than 15 seconds to do a 25, you got to do even shorter reps. Because the goal here is absolute speed and not sustained effort. And for this pure max speed work, there isn't much of a difference between a beginner and an advanced 50-only sprinter in terms of volume or frequency of this type of speed training. The difference comes from the degrees of effort put into the challenge of being constantly faster. So for example, a beginner would do the same 6 times 20 meters from the blocks as does the superstar sprinter. However, while beginners can just take a few deep breaths and aim to break their best time from last week, the high-end sprinter might start the preparation to be faster a few days earlier. They might need to do a specific technique session the day before and maybe some visualization in the morning before the practice, and maybe take a 15-minute break after the warm-up to really concentrate, and then go on and analyze each repetition from the underwater video for 20 minutes before doing the next rep. The overload comes from the effort applied to trying to become faster and not from doing more. And in all reality, the pure speed sessions could be pretty much the same all year long. Of course, some variation might keep the training more interesting and help in busting through speed plateaus, but as long as the essence of being faster over time is maintained. These types of workouts can be repeated, obviously depending on the other training done within the training week, maybe like every 48 to 72 hours. And it is very easy to find the right frequency. Let's say you did 25s from the blocks on Monday and repeat the similar set on Wednesday, and find yourself slower on the first couple of reps. What do you do? And I'm asking you to make sure you remember the content of this video. So answer, I will wait. Okay, you got your answer? You probably got that right. You terminate the set and either go home or continue with some easy technical work. So you've started to training pure speed, short, sharp, maximal efforts. But that's not the whole race, because you do need to finish your full race strong. And for that you need some speed endurance, the glycolytic part of the 50-meter race equation. And in here, you have to be careful and avoid the trap of training speed slowness, which usually comes through programming speed endurance sets from the endurance mentality. Because who cares if you can repeat 90% velocity of your 50-meter race progressively for more volume over the weeks if that speed doesn't increase over time? The adaptation you are after is the ability to hold the highest possible percentage of your maximal speed for slightly extended periods. For example, if your top speed is 2 meters per second for 10 meters, speed endurance ability would be measured, for example, by the distance you can hold at 1.7 to 1.9 meters per second, which is around 85 to 95% of your max velocity, and push that distance upwards throughout the season, while simultaneously trying to get even closer to that 2.0 meters per second velocity. Think of it as extending your turbo boost just long enough to cross the finish line. As always, there are many ways to accomplish this, and traditionally long rest intervals of, for example, repeated 50s have been used for this lactate production training. However, in my experience, and this is totally anecdotal, it's that while this type of practices develop very fast, the adaptation curve is short-lived. Depending on the person, usually after 4 to 6 such practices, the improvement stops and can even start regressing. So I usually recommend my athletes to restrain the use of this type of lactate production training to only do the very last block before a competition, as it is, of course, the most specific type of practice can be done towards the race. And the recommended frequency for almost all master swimmers is just once per week, as this type of training is very demanding and only to be done again for short periods of time, emphasizing the training block prior to the competition. But during most of the training season, I instead suggest trying a lactic speed endurance sets that use very short repetition distances and modulate the rest times depending on the desired adaptation. The repetition distance should be about 10 to 15 seconds, so maybe 15 to 25 meters, and resting more than 3 minutes between reps will stimulate the phosphorylation system, as almost no lactate accumulation will be present. However, if you cut the rest time to around 90 seconds or even less, lactate will start running through the veins as you go through the set, while the acidity levels will not become an issue before the set stops due to the inability to hold required pace of about 90 to 95% of your intended race velocity. You do get some glycolytic benefits, not maximal stimulus, but some. But here lies the strength of this type of lactic speed endurance training. It can be trained multiple times a week, maybe even up to 3 times per week for master swimmers, and for months at a time. Since the neural demand is not maximal, the nervous system doesn't get as fried as for maximal sprinting, and you have the ability to gather quite substantial volumes of high quality swimming done with your sprinting technique. And again, it's very hard for me to give exact volume recommendations, but you could start out by doing 2 to 3 rounds of 4 to 6 repetitions, and again, adding volume for volume's sake is not the goal. Instead, you should be actively thinking about how to achieve faster speeds with ever-lessening effort. Now, if you want to push more into the lactate world, to a place where this type of work kind of stopped being lactic, which just means no lactate, cut the rounds and just do straight sets. This way you allow the lingering lactate to start accumulating during the set, while permitting some minimal level of degradation in speed. And now, finally we get into the good stuff. The third type of training experiences recommended for the pure sprinters is power training in the pool by using different types of resistance devices. And all the different tools have their strengths and limitations, but the underlying idea is the same. Adding resistance to your fast swimming while holding velocity as high as possible, working more on that force side of the power, velocity times force equation, building up specific strength to your swimming strokes. While there's multiple iterations on the same theme and experimentation is always allowed, a general rule would be to keep the resistance to a level that diminishes your speed just about 5 to 10% when compared to your free, non-resisted swimming speed. Anything more and you run the risk of breaking down your technique and not really working towards power anymore. And a classical example progression would be to do timed 15s with the power rack, adding 2 to 5 kilos of resistance week by week while aiming to hold speed constant. And after that, reversing the process and hopefully hitting your old non-resisted speeds with minor resistance at the end of the cycle. However, most master swimmers probably don't have access to a power rack, and parachutes can quite easily be used for these purposes by using your imagination on how to add a bit more surface area to the parachute week by week while still maintaining your speed. Somewhat similarly, fins, paddles, drag socks, elastic tubing, etc. all might offer some benefits, but I like to think these tools more as reinforcers of technique and that elusive feel for the water, as the transfer from developing your fin-powered 25-meter sprint to non-assisted 25 is very minimal, although same could be said about resisted swimming as well. Because when applying external resistance to your swimming, the resistance to be overcome now comes from behind the swimmer and not from the front in the form of frontal drag as it is in free unresisted swimming. So eventually any improvements acquired in swimming power through resisted swimming must then be translated to unresisted swimming through practice. And that is why every resisted repeat or sprinting should probably most often be followed by 3 unresisted swimming, and any blocks of training that are dominated by resisted swimming should be followed by a block of training where resistance is not used or minimally used. Now, depending Depending on the set design, resistive equipment can be used for physiological development 1 to 3 times per week and even daily in order to improve your swimming technique and kind of potentiate other types of improvement sets. Just be careful not to become a swimmer who is specialized in being able to stretch the 15-meter bungee to 25 meters, or the swimmer who is surviving 25s with 3 parachutes attached to themselves, because that's not the goal. You still have to keep the principle of specificity in mind and aim to find ways to use resistant swimming intelligently towards your end goal, which is obviously faster racing speeds. So these are the core training pillars used in pure 50-meter sprint programming. Pure speed development, speed endurance training using both lactic and alactic set types, and resisted power training. Different combinations, emphases, and progressions of these should dominate your seasonal plan. And in general, always start planning from speed development and add the other forms of training to either support the development of your speed or to extend your capacity to hold that speed for the duration of your race. Now, while the right kind of physical preparation is critical, there's another half to sprinting success, and that's technical precision. And nowhere it is as important than training towards races that are decided by the smallest of margins. Any small polishes you can make to your start, underwaters, breakouts, turns, and finishes, and including stroking technique, might be the difference between getting on the podium or not. Considerable time should be taken every training day to improve the technical precision of at least one aspect of your race, which includes your stroke technique with set designs that maximize your opportunities to learn. This means minimal metabolic loads, so lots of rests and lots of repetitions, feeding the work technical precision into the physiologically demanding sets, because it is not enough to control your skills while you have the time to think, as in slow swimming, but also doing the real thing, which is sprinting. All of the wall speeds, starts, turns, and finishes should be practiced on their own and as part of the whole performance, where the technical precision has to be blended into the full performance of your sprinting. So now that you understand the principles, let's put them into practice. The program was built using the principles introduced in this video, and you can find months and months of sprint swimming programming among programming for all the other events at Swim Rehearsal Community, with videos detailing and explaining every steps of the programs from me. And if you want to join, the link is in the description. Back to the sample program, which uses 3 sessions per week designed to be swam every 48 to 72 hours. This allows you enough recovery time, but if you choose to swim more, just make sure that those extra practices are spent mainly at improving your skills at lower intensities. And every training session uses the same structure. After an extensive out-of-the-water warm-up, we start out with a technically focused set, where our goal is to introduce and build awareness to technical details important for your stroke. And you should keep the technical focus the same for at least 1 week or even longer, because changing it from workout to workout doesn't allow you enough practice time to really create change in your skills. And this warm-up could really be anything based on your needs, but for the sake of example, I recommend this: 3 to 4 rounds of 2x50s of technical drills, followed by 4 times 25 full stroke swimming with fins, focusing on the chosen technical quality every millimeter of those drills, and then aiming to translate those experiences to your full stroke, aided by the fins. And of course, breaststrokers shouldn't use the fins because they don't really allow you to kick effectively. After the technical set, we go into a very short potentiation set to activate our nervous system towards sprinting. And at the same time, our goal is to maintain our engagement on the week's technical focus while accelerating our velocity closer closer to full sprinting speeds. As an example, 625s with or without paddles, just accelerating each length, both allows you to kind of ignite your fast twitch fibers and transfer the skills you have been working towards from slow swimming to fast swimming. And now we are ready for the improvement set of the day. And while the warm-up and potentiation set could stay the same for weeks, it is encouraged to change it according to your needs. However, these improvement sets should stay constant, while putting all your efforts into improving the same set slightly every time you repeat it. And in the first session, our focus is on full-on absolute speed, the bread and butter of sprint training, and we do repeated 15 to 25 meters from the blocks, or a distance like we discussed that takes you about 10 to 12 seconds to cover. The repetition range is about 4 to 8 and determined by either your objective measures, which means basically your time, or subjective feelings of fatigue. In either case, you should stop the set the moment your speed starts to go down, and preferably even before that. And between the reps, you can rest as long as you want, but at the very minimum, you should relax 3 minutes. And after the first improvement set, you can either passively or actively just recover for at least 5 minutes, although it would be even more optimal to rest and recover for up to 15 to 20 minutes before the second improvement set of the day, which in the first session is 4 to 8 times 10 to 15 meters finishes, focusing on counting the steps or strokes into a maximally reached winning finishing touches. Every other one is technically focused, kind of at the moderate velocity, modeling for the next one, which is done at full sprint racing speed. And again, you can rest as long as you want between the reps. And that's it. Depending on how much time you spent in the technical set and how much you swam during the rest and recovery time, the overall volume is so low that there is no reason to even mention it. And that's the thing. You should only be focusing on getting faster and improving your technique, and how much distance you cover throughout the practice is totally inconsequential. In the second session of the week, we can start with the same technically focused set and repeat the potentiation set of 625s accelerated to get ready for our first improvement set. Aim to improve our speed endurance by doing 2 to 3 rounds of 3 to 4 times 20 to 25 meters of relaxed sprinting. Kind of a speed that allows you to use the rhythm of your sprinting stroke, but without pushing the pedal to the metal, and resting about 2 to 3 minutes between repetitions. And then either resting or leisurely swimming about 5 to 10 minutes between the sets. Again, the exact number of rounds and repetitions should be controlled by either your time or by your subjective feelings. There should be this slight fatigue or acidity present, but you should stop when you still feel like you could do more. And after the last 5 to 10 minutes break or warm down, we finish off with some turns, developing them into a weapon for your races. And even if your next competition is on long course, there's little to be lost by polishing this integral part of your short course racing. The specific set is 6 to about 12 repetitions of 10 meters into the wall and then exploding off the wall with your competitive distance underwaters to break out and performing 2 full cycles of swimming. 1 repetition is done relaxed, modeling every step of the turn with full-on focus. The second repetition is done at kind of a moderate pace that still allows you to control the mechanics consciously, and every third rep is at your racing full-on sprinting speed, aggressively speeding up to the wall and then exploding out with full intent of taking over your imaginary race. And again, you can rest as much as you want between the reps, but you should use the rest time to your advantage by giving yourself feedback and making a plan of action to explode out from the wall even faster. Then, kind of depending on your feel, you just repeat this cycle of the 3 turns 2 to 4 times. Then the last practice of the week goes through the same progression at the beginning. technical set and potentiation before hitting it hard with the power development set using resistance equipment. Now, the set is designed for parachute or power rack if you are lucky enough to have one. But you can use whatever you have available, stretch cords, drag suits, t-shirts, whatever. And if you have none available, there's absolutely no worries. This session just then becomes your second pure sprinting practice of the week. And we do 2 to even 4 rounds of the following. 2 times about 10 seconds of sprinting against the resistance at about 90% effort, making sure to hold your technique crisp, especially the length of your stroke. Only using an amount of resistance where you can still hold on to your racing mechanics, because there's absolutely no sense at rehearsing choppy, would I say kind of shitty swimming. And after the 2 resisted sprints, we do a full 25 sprint from a push, feeling how our muscles are now primed to produce even higher levels of power. The rest between the sprints is about 2 to 4 minutes, and after every round you should take again passive or active rest of at least 5 minutes. And over the weeks you should slowly add resistance if possible and fight to keep both your distance per cycle or your stroke length and velocity the same in the resisted sprints. And of course, swim the singular 25 faster and faster. Lastly, after an extended break after the last round of the power set, we end the week with some deliberate work on our starts by doing at least 4 and up to 12 racing starts with the concomitant underwaters and maybe 1 to 2 cycles of swimming after the breakout. The start is to be done with full intent to jump further and dive into the pool with less and less splash, but there is no need to really push aggressively during the underwaters and breakout strokes. Just go fast and relaxed, aiming to feel how to keep the velocity of the start with as little effort as possible. And that's it! A full week of specific training towards your 50-meter racing performance. And there's no need to make it any more complex than this. This framework works for all the strokes and is especially effective both at the start of the season and before your competitions. But within a long season, you should vary the stimulus a bit and work on those physiological qualities that you maybe find that are limiting your specific sprinting performance. So what are you waiting for? Hit the pool, get fast, and leave endurance for everyone else. And if you want a personalized approach to your training built around your goals, your schedule, and your stroke, I offer one-to-one coaching for swimmers of all levels and events. So whether you're preparing for a competition, returning to the sport, or just ready to train with more purpose and clarity, I'll help you get there. You'll find the link to apply for the coaching in the comments. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.